function. We'll let John come up as the co-host, and I'll pin him too. How you doing, John?
Well, can you hear me?
We can, yeah. It's a little muted, so maybe I don't know if you just want to turn up your volume just a little bit, but we got you.
Sure. Okay. Great.
Thank you so much for coming in. Just like I mentioned to Laddie earlier, you've been an inspiration over the years as far as the systems that you have, and I've been, trying to trying to get you guys funding to put our systems in the ground, because it is really life-changing, right? It's a paradigm shift in how we address certain climatic issues. The systems themselves that you guys have been describing, it would be great to have them in riverways in China and in India on the floating islands and around those borders, as well as here in the United States. And I hope, and I'm thankful that you guys are doing what you're doing, and I think that we're right on the cusp of getting that done for everybody. So thank you for joining our conference today. I know you have a really busy schedule, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm excited to talk. Did you want me to go through a presentation on some of the work we've done on salts, boron, and selenium on some of these brine sites?
Yeah, but let's maybe get started with your background a little bit too. I mean, what brought you to Intrinsyx? What are your relationships in the past? I'm fascinated by intrinsic systems as it relates, as you have mentioned in the past, your connection and collaboration with NASA, and you guys are just paving the way for restoration systems. I remember in the news when they had the King gold mine spill that happened. I just immediately thought, how do we get John on the ground, and why is he not the first person to get a call when we have an oil spill? So that is always kind of in the back of my mind. I think and I hope that we have a new administration or a new mentality at a governmental level that says we already have the people in our back pocket. When there's an emergency, we put them on the ground within the first minutes, as opposed to like that King mine spill. It went on and on for weeks and weeks until it actually started to get treated or blocked or changed. So just give us an overall introduction of yourself, your team, and your reason for wanting to use plants to clean up the environment.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan. Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. John Freeman. I did my PhD at Purdue University in the Center for Phytoremediation Research, also the Center for Ionomics, which is the study of all the genes that control ion homeostasis and uptake in plants. I also then did a couple postdocs at Colorado State University before joining the USDA ARS in the San Joaquin Valley Ag Science Center in the Central Valley of California. And I was fortunate to work with one of the world's foremost experts, plant soil scientists focused on salt and boron tolerance, and also on selenium and selenium phytoremediation, but also selenium for animals and for human health, because it's really two sides of the same coin. We use plants for cleanup of the environment, but we also use plants for human nutrition and for valuable feedstocks. After USDA, I was recruited by NASA to work on a couple International Space Station flight experiments using mutant Arabidopsis. And then from there, I started working with NASA's Earth Sciences and Forestry Division, and then now back with USDA ARS. I actually just got off a call with two of the leaders from NASA and USDA ARS, dealing a lot with eco-restoration work, high salinity sites, high erosion sites, fire, drought, and other issues. And so NASA and USDA actually work quite a lot on that. And it's really nice to be able to work with these governmental providers on exactly these types of projects that we're discussing today. So thank you. Let me go ahead and jump in here then. See if I can get to the full screen view. Start the slideshow, and we can jump in here. Intrinsyx and PPCU were two firms that were funded and started to really do the implementation of some of these technologies developed by our government and by academia. And so we've been able to really pull from those academic and government sources and work together with USDA and with NASA and with also School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at University of Washington to really bring some of these very well characterized, very important technologies into the field. Really what we're talking about is a multidisciplinary approach, team-based approach to these projects, where we come up with advanced knowledge and really applicable technologies for phytoremediation and phytomining. And that really is both terrestrial and floating island based. One of the species we've been working with for a long time with USDA and with private growers is the hybrid poplar tree. And this one is actually screened out of 400 other salt and boron tolerant hybrid poplar varieties, and this one is very, very salt and boron tolerant. It's not a halophyte, but it grows in brackish water quite well, and is very high biomass, and it's also male sterile cottonless. And so this is actually on the west side of San Joaquin Valley on a salinity management, farm management site where we're testing these technologies out. And so it has the ability to put on biomass. Cows and horses can eat this biomass. Also, it can be used for paper, and it's really good for cleaning up high salinity boron and also selenium from soils and water. And it can be grown also, it's a water loving tree, so it can be grown on the floating treatment wetlands, on the floating islands. Another species we've been working with is Jose tall wheatgrass. It's another really good forage species and can be used for animal feed. And with the Westlands Water District, also on the west side of San Joaquin Valley, we actually flood these paddocks with drainage water, very high in selenium and salt and boron, and grow this for an animal feed. Now, animals, of course, you have to give salt in their diet anyways, and selenium in their diet. And so having a source of that using these varieties of Jose tall wheatgrass is very advantageous. This site actually has a whole series of 1 acre paddocks that go from increasing to decreasing levels of salinity. And so you can imagine a system like that where you manage salt water or other ag drainage waters in this fashion and produce products. You can see the salt in the foreground on the bottom there. Also in this picture is another species called Old Man Saltbush, or A. triplex pneumolaria. It gets very big. This person is 6 foot tall. And so you can see this is a halophyte that actually exudes salt on the leaves. And again, another really good source for animal feed, and can be used as a salt-rich source of animal feed in the livestock industry. And this one will do 40 decimine salt water, so you can feed it seawater. And it also grows very well in flooded paddocks, and can be useful in those 1 acre paddocks or in the floating treatment wetlands. When we talk about this area around Casterson Reservoir that has incredibly high salinity and salts and boron, it also has incredibly high selenium. And that resulted, when they were running this material into wetlands, in a fish bird kill that was very large. So they stopped running it into the wetland and they started running into these paddocks, and you can see the salt crashes out on the top of these paddocks. And so they can be the salts can be harvested there as a mineral resource. I mentioned the bird kills and the death and the fish and the birds on Casterson Reservoir. Well, what was happening there was the water was being evapoconcentrated, and you were leaving the selenites behind. And then we know how selenate moves up into these fish and birds, causing all of these deformities and death. It was primarily through the selenites and the selenite, and then getting into the food sources of these animals. It was a very negative effect, and actually Casterson Reservoir is no more. I've heard they've bulldozed it over the top And so now everybody is required to deal with their ag runoff on site. In fact, they've closed the San Joaquin drain out of this area. So all of the growers and farmers are really required to manage their salinity on site. I guess the take-home message is it can be done by using the right tools. Another tool we were working with USDA ARS, and this was published in Environmental Science and Technology, was a selenium hyperaccumulator that's native to the West. It's called Stanleya pinnata. We screened and selected for varieties of these native outcrossing perennials at the ARS, and got some that were very salt and boron tolerant. You know, they're not all created equally in an outcrossing population. Over time, we found we could actually produce a great amount of biomass of 2 years after screening and selection using the seed. And this is a picture of the brassica native selenium hyperaccumulator thriving on salt and boron laden ag drainage sediments. And so these are really neat plants. They're actually originally eaten by the Native Americans in a boiled cabbage-like stew called squaw, as a prairie cabbage. A little bitter, but that's why they boiled it. But this is actually also a very good food source and a good supplement of selenium that we can use in organic amendments. And it's a native plant. The bees love it. And we had really good success here and then planting this out back on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley to produce biomass that we could then use to do things. For example, we can use it as an amendment in animal feed, I mentioned. We studied these plants, these trees, found they volatilize incredibly high levels of selenium naturally, like they would do in a native ecosystem. And they had very high concentrations of selenium, you know, in their biomass, up to, in 2 years, up to roughly 4,500 milligrams per kilogram dry weight selenium. We were able to actually calculate the true phytoremediation of selenium, which is another element relevant to the Salton Sea. And we were able to show we could actually accumulate up to 2.6 kilograms of selenium per hectare, which is a good amount. And it makes for a nice mineral resource in areas of the world that are deficient in selenium. Even here in the US, we have areas that are deficient where selenium needs to be added to livestock and animal feed. We took these species of Stanleya pinnata that we selected, and then we started to use them on phytoremediation sites. For example, here's one in Wyoming. It was the selenium and uranium phytoremediation site, and the plants did very well. So from hot, desert arid to cold arid environments, this native species does very, very well. This work, actually, we won second best runner-up ES&T Paper of the Year award. And they said that this type of technology set will have very big impacts in the field in the future. And so we're pretty excited to deploy this. This is another site working with City of Fort Collins, phytorestoration and vegetative cover. This is a water pipeline with the City Parks Department. So on Cretaceous shale, had high selenium, also salty area, and we were able to establish this plant up front was the first to establish, actually, and then it let some of the other species come in behind it in terms of erosion control, controlling the dust, controlling the runoff, and then letting the native species come in as well as this one and actually take over and establish the site. On the west side of the San Joaquin Valley with ARS, we also grow oilseed crops. And so we've got varieties that are salt and boron tolerant, that uptake selenium, and that are used to make oil seeds and oil meals. You can see the scale that these were planted. That material from the seeds is actually used to make biodiesel. This is esterified. That was projects with the Navy and Cal State Fresno. And the seed meal itself is a feed for cows and sheep and horses and chickens, and so it's a way to bring selenium in there. So these are all examples of how to manage salinity on farms, how to manage runoff, large scale applications. and how to produce, viable feedstocks and economic gain through managing these very salt impacted lands. I've left some room for questions here, and want to be able to talk as much as I can to those that may have questions. So I think we've got about 8 to 10 minutes or so. So let's open up, and I'm happy to talk about this more. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm always astounded at the information that you have on there. I mean, I wanted to go back to the question or the comment that you made previously where they shut down. So the local municipality shut down their processing area. And so it was left to the individual farmers. So I just want to kind of highlight that comment that you made, because that's kind of, I think, a common thread. The farmer themselves, and I'm really thankful in the recent stimulus bill that there was a lot of support for individual farmers. That's something that has been lacking for a long time, where individual farmers on themselves are just trying to survive, let alone add these additional components. And we know that there's grant funding. I keep getting the updates about farm funding, USDA grants for individuals. But is there a more centralized approach that you see as viable?
Well, I think the co-ops and better integration with the local water advisory board are really important. Every site is different, every location is different. This one, they ran into trouble because they thought they were okay by disposing of their wastewater into these natural ecosystems. And it wasn't until they started noticing all the dead birds and fish that they realized there was a problem, and they needed to do some investigation and figured out, okay, selenium was the culprit here. Since then, in this area, water has been very short. And so, a lot of the water has been provided by the local water district, and drainage waters, have been very non-existent. And so, in many ways, it's fortunate for the rest of us that ARS and California Water Management and Research Division and the UC, Ag Extension groups were able to do the work there on that site with the drainage water and with the on-farm salinity management system. So we now know what to do. At least we have a great amount of tools in our toolbox. In an area on the Salton Sea and in between Mexico and there, I think there's going to need to be, as you've done and are doing, a lot of integration and planning and local support, as well as managerial support that make smart decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's right on point. There needs to be a master plan. We just got integrated and we're preparing an offer for a tribe up north that needs a master plan. They found out that they were doing buildings in different places, and there happened to be a commercial building that was right next to a residential or a restaurant. So a lot of times that is kind of critical item to start with. They need a master plan, and I think that's why we culminated in this summit. Is the master plan is here. It takes a comprehensive approach that includes all of the large scale thinking, but all of the very granular property level thinking. And just specific to that, each of these farms, these are some of them are owned by big corporations. If there's an individual farmer in Imperial County, they're probably some of the poorest in the entire country. Imperial County, their economic opportunities are kind of part and parcel to some of the economically depressed people in West Virginia, right? These are our two areas, and this is in the back door of Southern California. So those funding mechanisms, as well as that master plan level thinking, has to really get ingrained.
Absolutely, and my goal as a scientist has also always been, how do we help the grower first, and how do we help them survive, and then how do we integrate them into a larger production system to make this a set of valuable technologies for everyone in the community. And there's a lot out there. There's much more than I've mentioned here in this short presentation that can be utilized. I feel like the USDA ARS has done a great job at some of these plant reintroduction stations and finding new technologies that growers can use. And so I'm really excited to try to implement some of these on your projects.
Hey, John, I have a question. Rob Simpson here.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
For the substrate for the selenium mitigating phytoremediation,
Yes.
how well would it work in wetlands, let's say adjacent to something like the New River? Does it need to be pumped out onto dry land essentially in order to grow these crops that take the selenium out of the environment? Or can it work in alongside a stream bed that, for instance, like the newer Alamo River, that's going to be allowing water going into the Salton Sea?
Yes, I think it can be definitely in and around saturated zones. This grass here on these paddocks was flooded quite a bit, and the same with this Halophyte here, the old man saltbush. Take flooded paddocks very well, take wet root zones very well. We've seen also really good hydroponic growth of Stanleya pinnata on islands in flooded, I would say partially flooded or transitional zones. This species will do well also. There's other ones, the native willows will take up some selenium. Some of these grass species that Galin mentioned on the previous one that can be used for biomass and for forage and feed can be used, and they take flooding very well. So I think the long answer here is yes. We have species that will handle in and around those riparian ecosystems.
Very good, thank you. Coming up at 1:30, I'll be talking a little bit about some of the possibilities for North Lake and South Lake. And these were really designed around a lot of floating islands and other phyto mitigation or remediation techniques, basically your work and the work of others. So I hope you can take a look at that, and maybe you'll have some questions, or for instance, how many acres of which species do we need? What's the best growing environment for that? Those are questions that I'll have for you later.
Well, that'll be excellent, Rob. Those are the types of questions we answer professionally through our consulting services. And we like to work on sites like this and come together with the team to really advise and come up with good management strategy. There's two more species I haven't mentioned on this presentation. One is the pickleweed, the salcornia, and then the other is the agretti species. Both halophytes, both are edible plants for human consumption that there's actually a market for now. And so those types of things, again, I have to give credit. Dr. Benuelos, USDA ARS, has done a phenomenal job. And we work with him and others. And so those are the types of things we'd be, really excited to talk with you about.
Yeah, and let me just mention too, because I think a very interesting concept that you've just detailed here is there is other dust mitigation strategies other than roughening dirt, right? And we look at this, and so that's the state. The California Natural Resources is trying to do as many acres as possible of dust mitigation with as low cost as possible. So, this is a big question for Arturo Delgado and for, Wade Crowfoot of these agencies. This is the lowest cost alternative that actually has a financial mechanism behind it. It actually has a habitat opportunity behind it. It has those food sources, as you mentioned, for the animals, as well as some human consumption. And these are the solutions-based approach that doesn't involve a till to move dirt around, that creates a dust bowl scenario. You're actually using water, and you're diverting Alamo and New River water into these selenium extraction farms, and then adding that water and overflow back in. You have the plug-in opportunity with each of these farms to be able to have this as your end flow that treats the water before it goes into the new and Alamo River. So it's really these type of concepts that can come forward. It's a matter of, are they on an approved list? Are they able to be deployed now? And that's the real gist of this conversation. I really greatly appreciate you stepping in and sharing this with everybody. I know the Salton Sea Authority is very interested in new tech and new ways to solve these solutions at a clip and try and get them done as quickly as possible. And give me an example per hectare. How long would it take to implement? How much would the cost be? I mean, if you're just thinking off the top of your head.
Yeah, it's fairly marginal for the seed. We've got these varieties of seed we can bulk up very quickly, and it expands, all on its own. They're very prolific seeders, most of them. It varies by the species for sure. But I mean, for a couple, I would say $1,000, a couple $1,000 per hectare, to get this stuff. At least for the cost of the seed and some of the amendments, at least. I won't weigh in on the labor costs on things because I don't know in your area. But to get things going established are fairly lower upfront costs. And these are perennials, most of them, right? Or they set prolific seeds. So many of these things are regenerative, and they can be harvested annually. There's got to be some carbon credits associated with all of this as well. So I think that's another avenue, and we work very closely with Arbor Day and other type carbon credit organizations.
Well, and you mentioned, my thought in thinking this area has the dust fallowing mentality, an alternative to dust fallowing, which creates more particulate matter in the region, are these farms. Incentivizing a farmer to jump in and deploy these systems in lieu of incentivizing them to not use water, right? Because we found, and the whole hypothesis of this conversation is, we need all of those farms wet. We need all the farms in Mexicali wet, and we need more than that. We need precipitation in Laguna, Salada, and potential for seawater farming outside of the traditional zone areas. So I think this is a great conversation. We had a couple of questions and comments in the Facebook portion. People were talking about the naval base, cleaning up that region. And I would just have to say that I know 100% John Freeman would be able to step in with his team and do some brownfield restoration, no matter what quality and content are there. I know it's a difficult task, but definitely needs to be cleaned up. And that would be a great demonstration area. The naval base, if there's a way to do an easement or a land lease, Aegis would be happy to step in there and work with John and his team and get some jobs started by farming these new products. So,
indeed, we do have a lot of former military and current military bases. We use a different set of technologies to deal with some of the organic contaminants and the metals. And so we've been very fortunate to work with great teams, and we'd be very excited to work with you all. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, John.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.